I am Harrison, 29 years old. For 29 years, I was the invisible shadow in my own family, the designated loser whose only purpose was to serve the golden child. But the moment my family drove off to a luxury resort, leaving me behind as a glorified babysitter, my entire reality shattered. While I was standing in the driveway, holding a list of medical instructions for my supposedly bedridden 14-year-old niece, my mother looked down at me from the passenger seat of my brother's brand-new Porsche. She adjusted her designer sunglasses and said, "Try not to ruin this for us, Harrison. Taking care of Lyra is the least you can do since you contribute absolutely nothing to this family's legacy." They laughed. They actually laughed at me in front of the neighbors, treating me like the hired help on a Tuesday morning. But there is one thing they did not know. The disabled niece they thought they were leaving behind was not disabled at all. She was sitting on a massive secret, and the luxury resort they were heading to? I was the secret majority shareholder. And right now, they are the ones begging for scraps on their knees. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their lives piece by piece, hit that like button if you believe that karma always collects its debts. And do not forget to tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let us go back to the morning the storm finally broke. It was a Tuesday in early October, the kind of morning where the crisp, biting chill in the air usually reminded me of upcoming Thanksgiving dinners. Those dinners were always the same. I was permanently seated at the far end of the massive mahogany table, miles away from the important conversations, silently passing the gravy while my family discussed real estate acquisitions and stock portfolios. I stood in the massive circular driveway of my parents' sprawling suburban estate. The house itself was a monument to their unchecked vanity, a colossal stone structure paid for by decades of ruthless business deals my father, Reginald, loved to brag about at HOA meetings. My older brother, Silas, was leaning casually against his gleaming silver Porsche. Silas was the golden child. If he merely breathed, my parents threw a parade in his honor. If I graduated college with top honors, working night shifts to pay for my own textbooks, they asked why I did not land a better promotion right out of the gate. Silas was currently loading heavy Louis Vuitton luggage into the trunk, his custom-tailored Italian suit catching the early morning sun. Beside him stood his wife, Vera. Vera always played the role of the sweet, accommodating daughter-in-law for the cameras, but her eyes held a cold, calculating emptiness that I always recognized. They were heading to a hyper-exclusive resort in the mountains, a place that charged upward of $5,000 a night, a place they claimed they desperately needed for family bonding and stress relief. Naturally, I was not invited. My wife, Fiona, was supposedly out of state on a high-stakes corporate trip, securing a massive salary increase. Or so she had told me when she kissed my cheek at dawn. That left me alone. Well, not entirely alone. I was specifically summoned to the estate to act as the full-time caretaker for Lyra, Vera's daughter from a previous marriage. Lyra was 14. 2 years ago, she suffered a severe neurological illness that supposedly left her completely bedridden and mute. My parents treated her like a cursed piece of furniture, an unfortunate blemish on their perfect aesthetic. Silas acted like she was a stain on his immaculate life, often complaining about the smell of her medicines. Vera played the tragic, long-suffering mother in public, shedding crocodile tears at charity galas, but behind closed doors, she barely looked at the girl. And so, the heavy responsibility fell to me. "Harrison," my father barked, rolling down his tinted window. The smell of expensive leather and stale cigar smoke drifted out. "Do not forget her medication schedule." I left the chart on the kitchen island. "And for God's sake, keep the house clean. I do not want to come back from paradise to find this place looking like a Walmart parking lot. Manage the landscaping crew if they show up." I gripped the edge of my thin jacket, feeling the rough fabric bite against my knuckles. I swallowed the familiar lump of humiliation in my throat. "I know the schedule, Dad. Have a good trip." Silas walked over, twirling the keys to the Porsche around his index finger. He slapped me on the shoulder, hard enough to sting, leaving a dull ache. "Hold the fort down, little brother. Maybe if you work hard enough and save your pennies, Next year we will bring you along to carry the bags. He smirked, sliding into the driver's seat and revving the engine just to make me step back from the exhaust. Vera did not even bother to say goodbye. She just stepped into the passenger side, her mind clearly already focused on room service and deep tissue spa treatments. I watched the Porsche glide down the long driveway, followed closely by my parents' massive luxury SUV. The heavy iron gates closed behind them with a loud, metallic thud, sealing me inside the suffocating, oppressive silence of the estate. I stood there on the pavement for a long time. The morning dew was soaking into my cheap shoes. I was 29 years old, working what they considered a mediocre administrative job, living in what they considered a mediocre, cramped house in the suburbs. My own wife was too busy climbing the corporate ladder to spend a weekend with me. My family used me as a doormat, wiping their dirty shoes on my dignity every chance they got. The physical weight of my own pathetic existence pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. But I had a job to do. I turned and walked back inside, navigating the echoing, empty hallways toward the isolated West Wing, where Lyra's room was tucked away far out of sight. I pushed the heavy oak door open gently, expecting to find the frail, silent girl staring blankly at the ceiling, trapped in her own failing body. Instead, I found Lyra sitting cross-legged on the edge of the mattress. She was wearing a gray, oversized hoodie and regular blue jeans, a sleek laptop balanced steadily on her knees. I froze. The medical chart I had just picked up from the kitchen slipped from my numb fingers and hit the hardwood floor with a sharp slap. Lyra looked up, closed the laptop with a definitive snap, and stared me dead in the eyes. "Finally," she said. Her voice was clear, sharp, and carried absolutely no trace of hesitation or weakness. I thought they were never going to leave. My brain completely stopped working. I stared at her, my mouth opening and closing like a fish thrown onto dry land. I grabbed the doorframe just to keep myself upright. You can talk. You are sitting up. You are wearing jeans." Lyra rolled her eyes, swinging her legs off the bed and planting her feet firmly on the ground. She walked over to me, her gait completely steady, completely healthy. She picked up the medical chart from the floor and tossed it into the trash can. "Yes, Uncle Harrison. I can walk. I can talk. I have been able to for over a year. Shut the door before the cleaning staff hears us. We have a lot of work to do." I moved mechanically, pulling the heavy door shut and turning the brass lock. I leaned against the wood, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "I do not understand anything right now. Why the wheelchair? Why the silence? I fed you pureed food for months, Lyra." Lyra walked over to her large walk-in closet, pushed aside a dreary row of white medical gowns, and pulled out a small, heavy fireproof lockbox. "Because," she said, punching a complicated numerical code into the glowing keypad, "if they knew I was healthy, they would have found a way to get rid of me legally. You know my biological father died 3 years ago, right? The plane crash." I nodded slowly, the memory surfacing. The funeral was a brief, incredibly tense affair where my family complained about the catering. "He left me a trust fund," Lyra continued, pulling a thick stack of legal documents from the metal box, "for $1 million. It is an ironclad inheritance. It unlocks automatically when I turn 18. Or, it transfers immediately to my legal guardian, my mother Vera, if I am deemed permanently incapacitated and institutionalized in a long-term care facility." The blood drained rapidly from my face, leaving my skin ice-cold. "Institutionalized." Lyra walked over and shoved a manila file into my chest. "Read it. They have been meeting secretly with Jasper Cole, Silas's absolute attack dog of a lawyer. They are planning to declare me a permanent, unmanageable burden. They are going to lock me in a state-run psychiatric facility and completely drain my college fund, my inheritance, everything. They need my $4 million to save themselves from total ruin." I flipped through the crisp pages. The legal jargon was dense, filled with endless clauses, but the malicious intent was crystal clear. Petitions for emergency medical guardianship. fraudulent assessments of permanent cognitive decline signed by a doctor I knew Silas played golf with. It was a perfectly orchestrated, cold-blooded legal murder. "They are monsters," I whispered, the horrifying reality of my family's depravity sinking deep into my bones. "They are," Lyra agreed, her young, innocent face hardening into a mask of pure, unbreakable steel. "But they are also incredibly sloppy. I have been recording their private conversations for 7 months. I have backdoor access to Silas's offshore financial records. They are drowning in massive debt, Harrison. That luxury resort they just drove to? Silas put the entire trip on high-interest credit he absolutely does not have, just trying to keep up appearances for some venture capital investors." She reached back into the dark metal box and pulled out a sleek, matte black envelope. She held it out to me. "What is this?" I asked, my hands shaking so badly I could barely take it from her. "That," Lyra said, a fierce, predatory smile spreading across her face, "is our counterattack. I bought 2 first-class plane tickets. We are going to that resort, and we are going to burn their entire fake lives to the ground." I opened the envelope. I looked at the premium tickets. Then I looked at the black titanium credit card nestled inside. I thought the worst was over. I was so incredibly wrong. The real nightmare was just about to begin. Sitting in the dim, quiet light of Lyra's bedroom, the explosive documents scattered across the floral bedspread felt like a physical weight pressing directly against my throat. I looked at this brilliant 14-year-old girl, realizing with a sickening jolt that she had been living in a self-imposed prison, trapped in a wheelchair, just to survive the very people who were legally obligated to protect her. "How did you do this?" I asked, my voice barely above a raspy whisper. "How did you sit in that chair for an entire year, letting them talk about you like you were already dead and buried?" Lyra sat back down on the edge of the mattress, her expression carrying a heavy exhaustion that belonged on someone much older. "You learn to disappear, Harrison. You learn to make yourself small so the predators do not notice you. You know how that feels better than anyone in this house." Her words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. She was right. I did know. I had spent my entire life perfecting the miserable art of disappearing. As I silently helped Lyra pack a real suitcase, throwing out the feeding tubes and packing normal clothes, jeans, sweaters, things a teenager should wear, my mind violently dragged me back through the miserable years of my childhood. The painful memories I had tried so desperately to bury came clawing their way to the surface, demanding to be felt. Growing up, this massive house was a dedicated shrine to Silas. His golden sports trophies lined the expensive marble mantelpiece in the living room. His mediocre report cards were framed in the hallway. When Silas crashed his first car, a horrific drunk driving incident that my father paid thousands of dollars to quietly cover up, he was rewarded the very next week with a newer, much faster model. When I won a prestigious state science fair, my mother completely skipped the award ceremony because she had a last-minute hair appointment she refused to cancel. But the most painful memory, the specific betrayal that still burned like acid in the back of my throat, was the day I found out about my college fund. I had worked 3 exhausting minimum wage jobs throughout high school, saving every penny, dreaming of attending an out-of-state university to finally escape their shadow. I had the official acceptance letter in my hand. I walked into my father's dark, wood-paneled study, overflowing with a rare, fragile sense of pride. I politely asked for the account details for the college fund they had promised me since I was a little boy. My father did not even bother to look up from his glowing computer screen. "The fund is gone, Harrison. Gone," I had asked, the room suddenly spinning out of control. "What do you mean, gone? It has been building for 18 years. Silas had a situation," my father said coldly, typing away on his keyboard. "A bad real estate investment in the city. He needed immediate capital to avoid a messy bankruptcy. Family helps family, Harrison. You can go to the community college down the street. It is much more suited to your speed and intellect anyway. Close the door on your way out." They had ruthlessly stolen my future just to pave over Silas's reckless mistakes. And the worst part? I had let them. I had swallowed the burning rage, taken out crippling, high-interest student loans, and worked myself to the absolute bone while Silas paraded around the city in custom Italian suits, calling himself a self-made entrepreneur. And then there was Fiona, my beautiful wife. We met in our early 20s, and for a short, wonderful while, I truly thought she was my sanctuary away from the madness. But over the last 2 years, she had grown incredibly distant, constantly cold to the touch. She started working late into the night, taking endless, mysterious business trips across the country. Whenever I tried to bridge the growing gap between us, she looked at me with this exhausted, heavy pity. "You lack ambition, Harrison," she told me during our last miserable anniversary dinner, constantly checking her phone under the table while I desperately tried to hold her hand. "You are way too comfortable being absolutely nothing. It is exhausting being married to someone who settles for the bottom." I snapped violently back to the present moment. Lyra was zipping up her leather travel bag. "Are you ready?" she asked, pulling me from the nightmare of my past. "Almost," I said, a new, dark resolve settling into my chest. "There is one very important thing we need to do before we leave this awful house." I walked out of the room and down the grand, echoing hallway, heading straight toward the staff quarters in the basement. I needed to find Hugo. Hugo had been the loyal family butler and estate manager for 30 years. He was the only person in this massive, cold house who had ever shown me an ounce of genuine kindness or respect. I found him in the massive industrial kitchen, quietly polishing the expensive silver cutlery. He looked up, his sharp, observant eyes widening slightly when he saw the intense, dark expression on my face. "Mr. Harrison, I thought you were tending to Miss Lyra in the West Wing. Your father's legendary real estate empire is a complete and total facade," Hugo said quietly, his voice laced with sadness. "Silas made 3 absolutely disastrous investments in commercial properties last year. They leveraged this entire estate. They leveraged your mother's entire retirement 401k. They are millions of dollars in the red. The only thing keeping the aggressive creditors at bay is the desperate promise of a massive, sudden influx of cash. I overheard them shouting in the study last week. They mentioned Miss Lyra's name repeatedly. And there is something else, sir." Hugo looked at me, a deep, agonizing sorrow pooling in his old eyes. "You have always been a good, decent man, Mr. Harrison. You do not deserve what they do to you." "What is it, Hugo? Tell me everything." "It is regarding your wife, Mrs. Fiona." My stomach dropped straight into the floor. "Fiona? What about her?" "She is on a corporate trip." "She has not been traveling for work, sir," Hugo whispered, looking at the floor. "Silas has been illegally routing holding company funds to a secret private account. He uses it to pay for luxury penthouse apartments and private first-class flights. The flights are always booked for 2 passengers. The second passenger is always Mrs. Fiona. They have been having an affair for over a year." The kitchen violently spun around me. The marble counter felt like a block of solid ice under my trembling hands. My wife, my own flesh and blood brother. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not fall to my knees. Something deep inside me, some fragile, hopeful part of my soul that still desperately wanted a loving family, just died right then and there. And in its place, a cold, absolute, terrifying clarity took root. "Thank you, Hugo," I said. My voice sounded entirely foreign to me. It was completely empty of emotion, sharp and dangerous as a razor blade. "You should take a very long paid vacation. Starting today. Leave the estate. Do not answer any of their frantic phone calls." I took the heavy leather ledger and walked back to Lyra's room. She saw my face and immediately knew that something fundamental had shifted inside me. "What happened?" she asked, gripping the handle of her suitcase. "We are going to the airport," I said, grabbing my dark winter coat. "And we are going to absolutely destroy them." The aggressive drive to the airport was a chaotic blur of neon city lights and highway markers. I gripped the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned stark white. My own mother, my father, my brother, my wife. They had all happily formed a tight circle of betrayal around me, feasting on my life, my money, and my sanity, all while telling me I was the one starving them. When we finally boarded the luxurious first-class flight, paid for by the secret emergency funds Lyra had brilliantly siphoned from her own trust before Vera could legally lock it down, I pulled out my phone and sent a heavily encrypted text message. The message went directly to Beatrice. Beatrice was my absolute best friend from college, a brilliant, cutthroat corporate lawyer who specialized in hostile corporate takeovers, brutal divorces, and high-stakes litigation. She was a shark in a tailored suit. B. It is time. Activate Protocol Omega. Meet me at the property. Her reply came exactly 30 seconds later. Consider it done. I am bringing the entire legal firing squad. Lyra looked casually over at my glowing screen. She raised a highly impressed eyebrow. Protocol Omega? Firing squad? You have deep secrets too, Uncle Harrison. I leaned back heavily in the plush leather seat as the massive plane began its steep ascent into the clouds. I looked out the small window at the rapidly shrinking city below. You are not the only one who learned how to play dead to survive, Lyra, I said quietly. They all thought I was a massive failure because I refused to work in my father's corrupt firm. They thought my modest suburban house and quiet life meant I had completely given up on success. What they absolutely did not know was that while Silas was gambling away the family fortune on flashy, doomed projects and expensive cars, I had taken a small, risky loan from Beatrice years ago and invested heavily in a struggling tech startup. That small startup went public and exploded. I took my massive, multi-million-dollar payout and quietly, entirely anonymously, began buying up premium commercial real estate across the country. I did not buy flashy sports cars to stroke my ego. I bought land. I bought properties. And 3 years ago, through a complex shell corporation managed by my billionaire partner, Roland, I purchased the very luxury resort my family was currently using to celebrate their upcoming theft of Lyra's inheritance. They were drinking expensive champagne in a building I legally owned. They were sleeping in beds I paid for. I looked at the damning financial documents Hugo had given me, then at Lyra's fireproof box full of medical fraud evidence. We had the clear motive. We had the undeniable evidence. We had the ultimate power. The turbulent flight took 4 hours. I spent every single agonizing minute of it vividly visualizing the exact moment I would watch their arrogant, entitled faces completely crumble into dust. When the plane finally touched down on the private island tarmac, the air was thick, hot, and humid. I turned my phone back on. There was a fresh text message from Fiona. Hey honey, corporate meetings are running super late. I am so exhausted. Might not be able to call tonight. Love you. I stared at the glowing words. Love you. The sickening, vile hypocrisy of it made my jaw clench so hard my teeth ached. Are you okay? Lyra asked, watching my face closely. I am absolutely perfect, I said, deleting the message permanently. We stepped off the plane and directly into a waiting, heavily armored black SUV. I gave the silent driver the address of the resort. The storm was no longer gathering on the distant horizon. I brought the storm with me, and I was going to make sure absolutely none of them survived the incoming flood. I thought the worst was over. I was so incredibly wrong. The massive black SUV wound its way aggressively up the steep coastal mountain road, the thick canopy of lush tropical trees parting occasionally to reveal the breathtaking, endless expanse of the dark blue ocean. It was a beautiful, isolated place, meticulously designed for the ultra-wealthy to completely escape the annoying consequences of the real world. But today, the harsh, unforgiving real world was coming directly for them. We pulled up smoothly to the grand, imposing entrance of the Obsidian Summit, my crown jewel resort. It was an absolute masterpiece of modern architecture, featuring towering walls of glass, dark volcanic stone, and massive infinity pools that seemed to drop precariously off into the sky. The eager valets rushed forward immediately, but before they could even open the doors, a tall woman in a sharp, intimidating charcoal suit stepped out quickly from the main lobby. It was Clara, the elite general manager of the resort. She was one of the very few people on this entire island who actually knew my true identity as the majority owner and chairman of the board. I rolled down the tinted window. "Mr. Harrison," Clara said, her professional demeanor completely unwavering, though her sharp eyes flicked to Lyra in brief surprise. "Your private luxury suite has been prepared exactly to your specifications. The security team has been briefed entirely as Beatrice requested." "Thank you, Clara," I said, stepping out of the vehicle. "Where are they right now?" "The party checked in exactly 3 hours ago," Clara replied, handing me a sleek, secure tablet. "They are currently occupying the presidential villa overlooking the cove. As you explicitly requested, I have isolated their specific security feeds from the main grid. You now have full, unadulterated audio and visual access to their public areas and the private oceanfront cabana they rented for the afternoon." "Have they met with anyone since they arrived?" I asked, taking the heavy tablet. "A man arrived via a private charter boat an hour ago. He provided ID matching the name Jasper Cole. He claimed to be their senior legal counsel. They are currently having an extended lunch meeting at the oceanfront cabana." "Perfect," I muttered, a dark satisfaction washing over me. "Have our luggage sent up to the penthouse. We are going straight to the subterranean surveillance room." Clara led us swiftly through a highly discreet side entrance, bypassing the crowded main lobby entirely. We descended quickly into the fortified subterranean levels of the resort, entering a state-of-the-art, climate-controlled security hub. The large room was pitch dark, illuminated only by the sterile blue glow of dozens of high-definition monitors. Clara silently dismissed the active security team, leaving just me, Lyra, and the glowing, watching screens. I tapped the tablet, instantly routing the live feed from Cabana 4 to the massive main monitor on the wall. There they were, my blood family. Silas was leaning far back in a plush white lounger, an incredibly expensive Cuban cigar clamped tightly between his teeth. My father, Reginald, was swirling a large glass of amber scotch, looking out at the sparkling water with the smug, arrogant satisfaction of a king surveying his conquered lands. My mother was casually flipping through a glossy luxury real estate magazine, and Vera was typing furiously on her golden smartphone. Across from them sat Jasper, the slimy lawyer, his leather briefcase wide open on the expensive glass table, papers spilling out. I reached forward and turned up the audio dial. The crystal clear, hidden microphones picked up every single despicable word over the gentle, rhythmic sound of the crashing waves. "The institutionalization paperwork is practically finalized at this point," Jasper was saying confidently, pulling out a thick stack of medical documents. "The independent medical assessments Vera provided explicitly state that Lyra has suffered severe, irreversible cognitive decline. She requires full-time, specialized psychiatric care. The lockdown facility in Nevada is prepped and ready to receive her by the end of the month." Lyra stood perfectly still beside me in the dark surveillance room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. I could clearly see the blue reflection of the monitors dancing in her eyes. She did not flinch. She just stood there and watched them plot her demise with terrifying, chilling calm. "And the trust fund?" Silas asked greedily, leaning forward, the thick cigar smoke curling around his arrogant face. "When exactly does the 4 million liquidate into liquid assets?" "The very moment the corrupt judge signs the emergency guardianship transfer directly to Vera," Jasper confirmed with a slick smile. "Given the extensive, fabricated medical history we provided, the judge will fast-track it without a hearing. The money will be routed to Vera's personal accounts within 48 hours. From there, she can legally transfer it straight to the family's holding company to, quote, secure Lyra's long-term financial stability." My father laughed, a harsh, grating, demonic sound that made my skin crawl. Long-term stability. God, I absolutely love the American legal system. That money will completely cover the commercial real estate margins and keep the aggressive creditors off Silas's back for good. Finally, that pathetic, mute brat is actually good for something useful. I gripped the cold metal edge of the console until my fingers ached. My own father. speaking about his young granddaughter like she was nothing more than livestock being led to the slaughterhouse. "What about Harrison?" Vera asked, not even bothering to look up from her phone screen. "Is he going to be a problem when he finds out? If he realizes she's being shipped off to an asylum?" Silas scoffed loudly, taking a deep drag of his cigar. "Harrison, please, Vera. The guy is a spineless, pathetic doormat. He will believe absolutely whatever lie we tell him. Tell him she desperately needs better medical care. He will probably pack her bags himself and drive her to the asylum just to desperately seek our approval. He is a pathetic loser." "He really is," my mother chimed in, turning a glossy page in her magazine without missing a beat. "I sometimes genuinely wonder if there was a mix-up at the hospital when he was born. He has absolutely none of the family's drive or intelligence. Thank God Silas is here to properly carry the legacy." I felt a cold, paralyzing numbness spread rapidly through my veins. For 29 long years, I had bent over backward to please these awful people. I had swallowed their daily insults, accepted their pathetic crumbs of affection, and stupidly believed that maybe, deep down in their cold hearts, they actually loved me. Hearing them speak so freely when they thought they were completely alone, it was the final, devastating nail in the coffin. The naive, hopeful Harrison they knew was dead. "They have absolutely no idea," Lyra whispered, her young voice heavily laced with pure venom. "Let's see what else they have no idea about," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet pitch. I watched the live feed intensely as Jasper packed up his expensive briefcase. "I will officially file the motion tomorrow morning when the courts open," the lawyer said, firmly shaking my father's hand. "Enjoy the resort, Reginald. You have definitely earned a luxurious vacation." As Jasper left the cabana, my parents and Vera slowly stood up from their loungers. "I am going to the spa for a hot stone massage," my mother announced, stretching her arms. "Vera, are you coming?" "Yes," Vera said, grabbing her expensive designer beach bag. "Silas, do not drink too much scotch. We have a highly important dinner reservation at 8. The three of them casually left the cabana, leaving Silas entirely alone. He sat there in silence for a few minutes, slowly finishing his cigar. Then, he pulled out his phone, typed a quick message and made a call. I tapped a few rapid commands on the console, isolating his specific audio feed. "Yeah, they are finally gone," Silas said smoothly into the phone. His voice dropped an entire octave, turning sickeningly sweet and intimate. "Come on down to the cabana, baby. The coast is completely clear." My heart completely stopped beating. The air in the small room suddenly felt way too thin to breathe. I stared unblinking at the screen, my eyes burning with unshed tears of pure rage. Exactly 2 minutes later, the wooden door to the cabana opened. A woman walked in. She was wearing a highly revealing, sheer white cover-up over a tiny black bikini. Her long hair was perfectly styled, blowing gently in the salty ocean breeze. She smiled, a radiant, incredibly familiar smile, and walked straight over to where Silas was sitting. Without a moment's hesitation, she straddled his lap, wrapping her slender arms tightly around his neck, and kissed him deeply, passionately. It was Fiona, my wife, the woman who had kissed my cheek that very morning in our kitchen, looking stressed, telling me she was overwhelmed about her corporate meetings. The woman who told me I severely lacked ambition and drive. She was right here, hundreds of miles away, wrapped around my own brother, laughing against his lips. "God, I missed you so much," Fiona murmured, her breathy voice echoing loudly through the high-definition speakers in the surveillance room. "Did Jasper get everything legally sorted?" "Everything is absolutely perfect," Silas said, running his greedy hands down her bare back. "The 4 million is entirely ours by the end of the month. We pay off the massive debts, and then I can finally afford to cut the dead weight." "Meaning your brother?" Fiona asked, playfully tracing his strong jawline with her fingernail. "Meaning Harrison," Silas confirmed with a cruel, mocking sneer. "The absolute idiot is sitting at home right now, wiping drool off that brat's chin, completely and utterly clueless. Once the trust money clears the bank, I am legally cutting him out of the family trust entirely. And you can finally hand him those brutal divorce papers. Fiona sighed happily, resting her head comfortably against his chest. I cannot wait. Being married to him is exactly like being chained to a sinking ship. He is so boring, Silas. So painfully average and poor. I deserve this life. We deserve this money. I stood completely frozen, staring at the glowing monitor. The intense physical pain radiating in my chest was so severe I genuinely thought I might be having a heart attack. Every single late night she claimed to be working at the office. Every time she aggressively pulled away from my touch in bed. Every time Silas mocked my salary, knowing full well he was sleeping with my wife. They had systematically, joyfully dismantled my entire life, my dignity, and my future, all while smiling directly in my face. Lyra reached out and placed a small, warm hand on my tense arm. She didn't say a single word. She just squeezed my wrist incredibly hard, anchoring my floating mind back to the present reality. I took a slow, shuddering, deep breath. The agonizing, heartbreaking pain rapidly morphed into something else entirely. Calcified, turned into a pure, unadulterated, burning rage. It was a dark, incredibly heavy power that settled deeply into my bones. I picked up my phone with a steady hand and dialed Beatrice. She answered on the very first ring. "Are you actively seeing this feed?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm and hollow. "I am logged securely into the feed right now, Harrison," Beatrice said, her tone all serious business, cold and sharp as a scalpel. "I have recorded the entire disgusting exchange in high definition. The audio is crystal clear. We have Jasper openly discussing the fraudulent guardianship. We have the conspiracy to commit wire fraud regarding the trust. And we have absolute, undeniable video proof of infidelity for the divorce proceedings." "Good," I said, not taking my eyes off Fiona. "Where is Roland?" "His private helicopter lands on the resort helipad in exactly 30 minutes, Beatrice replied. "The legal traps are fully set. The massive asset freezes are queued up with the banks. We are just waiting for you to pull the trigger. Get the most aggressive divorce papers drawn up right now," I commanded. "I want absolutely everything. I want the house. I want her car. I want every single dime she has ever earned or hidden. And I want Silas's financial records subpoenaed by the FBI tomorrow morning." "You got it, boss. What is the play for tonight?" I looked at the monitor. Silas and Fiona were now drinking expensive champagne, laughing loudly at a joke I couldn't quite hear. "They have a dinner reservation at the main luxury restaurant at 8 o'clock, I said, a dark, sinister smile pulling at the corner of my mouth. "Let them dress up. Let them feel like absolute royalty. And then we are going to drop the sky directly on their heads." I hung up the phone. The storm had not just arrived. I was the storm, and they had absolutely no shelter. I thought the worst was over. I was so incredibly wrong. The agonizing hours between the afternoon betrayal and the evening confrontation stretched out like a tightly drawn bowstring ready to snap. The heavy tension in the air of our massive, opulent private penthouse was palpable, almost suffocating. I stood silently by the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows, looking far down at the sprawling, perfectly manicured grounds of the resort. Wealthy guests moved like tiny ants around the glowing infinity pools, completely unaware of the absolute nuclear explosion that was about to happen right in the middle of their pristine paradise. Lyra was sitting at the massive mahogany dining table behind me, typing furiously on her high-end laptop. She had spent the last 2 solid hours easily penetrating Silas's personal email server, completely bypassing his laughable, amateur security measures. "You know," Lyra said loudly without even looking up from the glowing screen, "for a guy who desperately thinks he is a criminal mastermind, Silas is an absolute idiot. He kept a clear, highly detailed digital trail of every single wire transfer he made from the family holding company to his private, illegal offshore accounts in the Caymans. He literally labeled the digital folder contingency." "Print it all," I said, my voice flat, not turning away from the window. I want physical copies of every single transaction. I want to drop a massive mountain of paper directly onto their dinner table. A soft, elegant chime echoed through the penthouse, signaling the arrival of the private VIP elevator. The polished steel doors slid open smoothly, and two very important people stepped out into the room. The first was Beatrice. She was wearing a striking, blood-red power suit, holding a sleek titanium briefcase that looked like it belonged in a spy movie. Her dark eyes were incredibly sharp, highly calculating, fully ready for a legal war. Behind her was Roland. Roland was a legendary billionaire eccentric, a man who had made a massive fortune in tech before aggressively pivoting to luxury real estate. He was in his late 60s, casually wearing a linen shirt and slacks, projecting an aura of immense, quiet, terrifying power. He was the public face of the massive shell company that legally owned the resort, the man everyone on Wall Street thought was the sole owner. "Harrison," Roland said, his voice a deep, comforting rumble that filled the room. He walked over and clapped a heavy, reassuring hand on my shoulder. I watched the security feed on the flight over. I have dealt with a lot of venomous snakes in the corporate boardroom over the years, but your family is a highly special breed of toxic. They are about to completely run out of venom, I replied, shaking his hand firmly. Beatrice set her heavy titanium briefcase on the table right next to Lyra. "The legal trap is fully armed and ready to deploy," she announced, snapping open the case and pulling out incredibly thick stacks of binding legal documents. First, the trust fund. As Lyra's newly appointed legal advocate, I have successfully filed an emergency federal injunction blocking any guardianship transfer. It is signed by a federal judge. Second, I have personally contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division with the undeniable evidence Lyra compiled. Silas's offshore and domestic accounts will be entirely frozen at exactly 8:15 p.m. tonight. And finally, she pulled out a single, heavily tabbed manila folder. It looked heavier than the rest. The divorce papers, cruel and abusive treatment, extreme infidelity, and massive financial fraud. I have fast-tracked a brutal restraining order freezing Fiona's access to all joint and personal assets. When she wakes up tomorrow morning, her platinum debit cards will bounce at a cheap vending machine. I looked down at the documents. The sheer weight of what I was about to do settled heavily over my shoulders. I was not just burning a family bridge. I was systematically blowing up the entire landscape. My parents would be completely bankrupt and humiliated. My arrogant brother would likely face severe federal prison time for wire fraud. My cheating wife would be financially ruined and publicly exposed. For a fleeting, highly pathetic second, the ghost of the old Harrison, the weak boy who just wanted his mother to look at his science fair trophy, the desperate man who just wanted his wife to actually love him, whispered quietly in the back of my mind, "Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? They are still your blood family." Then I vividly remembered my mother's cruel laugh in the driveway. I remembered Silas constantly calling me a spineless doormat. I remembered Fiona happily straddling my brother in the cabana, laughing about my poverty. I crushed that weak ghost until there was absolutely nothing left but ash and dust. "It is completely perfect," I said, my voice incredibly steady and cold as ice. Roland poured himself a tall glass of sparkling water and leaned casually against the marble counter. "I have thoroughly briefed Clara and the resort's elite private security detail. 10 highly trained former military contractors. They will be stationed discreetly at the perimeter of the dining room. When you give the signal, they will move in immediately. Absolutely no one is leaving that room until you say so." I checked my heavy luxury watch. It was exactly 7:45 p.m. I walked purposefully into the master bedroom and began to change my clothes. I took off the cheap, unremarkable khakis and sweater I usually wore, the required uniform of the invisible, forgettable brother. I put on a stunning, custom-tailored midnight blue suit I kept exclusively at the penthouse for high-level business meetings. I fastened a massive, incredibly expensive luxury watch around my wrist, a gift from Roland after our first wildly successful corporate acquisition. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. The man staring back was absolutely not a victim anymore. He was an executioner. When I walked back into the living room, Beatrice took one look and smirked. Now that is the ruthless CEO I know and love. Lyra stood up from the table. She was wearing a sharp, highly elegant black dress she had packed, her dark hair neatly and professionally styled. There was absolutely no trace of the sick, broken, mute girl she had pretended to be for a year. She looked incredibly fierce. She looked like a warrior ready for battle. "Are we finally doing this?" Lyra asked, her sharp eyes locked intensely on mine. "We absolutely are," I said. I picked up the massive stack of legal documents from the table and handed half of them to Beatrice to carry. We took the private VIP elevator all the way down to the main floor. The resort's signature 5-star restaurant, the Apex, was a stunning architectural marvel. A massive glass-walled dining room suspended precariously over a jagged cliff edge, overlooking the violently crashing ocean waves far below. It was strictly reserved for the most elite, high-paying guests. As we approached the grand entrance, Clara was waiting patiently for us. She gave a small, highly respectful nod of her head. "They are currently seated at the center table, Mr. Harrison," Clara said very quietly. "Table 7. The absolute best view in the entire house. Your security detail is in position and waiting for your command." I glanced slowly around the perimeter of the dimly lit, incredibly elegant restaurant. I could clearly see the security personnel, dressed in sharp black suits, blending seamlessly into the shadows near the exits and the kitchen doors. "Thank you, Clara," I said. "Let them finish ordering their expensive appetizers. We absolutely do not want to ruin their appetite before we serve them the main course." We stood quietly in the dark shadows near the mahogany host stand, watching them. My father was loudly holding court, laughing, a massive glass of expensive red wine in his hand. My mother was proudly examining her diamond rings under the bright chandelier light. Silas sat looking incredibly arrogant and untouchable in his designer suit. Vera was smiling warmly, playing the perfect, loving wife. And there, sitting right next to Silas, acting exactly like she had just arrived from her stressful business trip, was Fiona. She was wearing a stunning, form-fitting red dress, leaning in closely to whisper something into my mother's ear. They all looked so incredibly happy, so victorious. They were cheerfully celebrating the millions they were about to steal, the lives they were about to destroy. They truly thought they were the apex predators feasting easily on the weak. They had absolutely no idea the steel cage door had just locked firmly behind them. I turned to look at Lyra. She gave a firm, decisive nod. I turned to Beatrice and Roland. They were perfectly ready. I slowly adjusted my expensive cufflinks, took one final deep breath, and stepped boldly out of the shadows and into the light. The silence was officially over. It was finally time to make some real noise. The dining room of the Apex was an absolute masterclass in high society intimidation. It was the kind of restaurant where the menus did not have prices, and the waiters moved with the silent, practiced efficiency of ghosts. The gentle, musical clinking of heavy crystal wine glasses, the hushed, arrogant murmurs of the extremely wealthy patrons, and the soft, rhythmic crashing of the dark ocean waves against the jagged cliffs directly below created a highly deceptive atmosphere of absolute peace. The air in the room smelled heavily of expensive black truffles, roasted garlic, and the salty, crisp breeze drifting gently in through the massive open terrace doors. I walked slowly and deliberately across the imported Italian marble floor, every single step feeling like a heavy, decisive strike against a blacksmith's anvil. For my entire 29 years of life, I had walked with my head bowed down, actively trying not to take up too much physical space, desperately trying not to offend or inconvenience the people who saw my very existence as an annoying burden. I was the invisible brother. I was the placeholder husband. But tonight I was taking up absolutely all the space in the room. The air shifted around me. I was the center of gravity. Lyra walked right beside me, her chin held high. She did not limp. She did not hesitate. She moved with the pure, unadulterated, terrifying confidence of someone who had just walked out of a burning building completely unscathed and was now carrying a match. Behind us, Beatrice and Roland perfectly matched our steady pace, forming an intimidating, unbreakable wall of legal and financial power, flanking us like seasoned generals marching confidently into newly conquered territory. We slowly approached Table 7. It was the undeniable centerpiece of the entire restaurant, a massive, luxurious circular booth draped in heavy white linen and completely surrounded by the breathtaking panoramic view of the dark, endless ocean. My family was entirely engrossed in their own vanity and greed. My father, Reginald, was swirling a $50 sip of vintage red wine in his massive glass, his face flushed with the arrogant, intoxicating warmth of a man who firmly believed he had just successfully cheated the universe and won the ultimate prize. My mother, Martha, was delicately picking at a highly expensive plate of seared scallops, her diamond tennis bracelets sparkling under the crystal chandelier. Silas had his left arm draped casually and confidently across the back of Fiona's chair, his fingers gently brushing against the bare skin of her shoulder. My wife, my own flesh and blood brother. They were laughing. It was a rich, careless, sickening laugh that made the blood in my veins run completely cold and harden into ice. I stopped exactly 2 feet from the edge of their table. I did not say a single word immediately. I just stood there in the low light, letting my physical presence cast a long, dark, undeniable shadow directly over their expensive plates and their fake, pathetic celebration. Fiona was the very first person to notice. She was in the middle of taking a delicate sip of golden champagne when her eyes fluttered lazily upward and locked instantly onto mine. The expensive crystal flute literally slipped from her perfectly manicured fingers. It hit the edge of the table, shattering into a dozen sharp pieces and spilling the expensive liquid all over the pristine white tablecloth. "Harrison?" she gasped loudly. The color drained from her perfectly made-up face so incredibly fast she looked like a walking ghost. Her hand instinctively ripped away from Silas's arm, pulling back violently as if she had just been severely burned by a hot stove. At the sudden, panicked sound of my name, the rest of the table froze in absolute, comical unison. Silas slowly turned his head, his arrogant, confident smirk instantly melting into a twisted, ugly mask of extreme, utter confusion. My mother dropped her heavy silver fork, the loud clatter echoing sharply over the soft ambient music playing in the background. My father's large hand tightened around his wine glass until his knuckles turned stark white. And Vera, the supposed tragic, loving mother, stared with wide, completely terrified eyes not at me, but directly at the teenage girl standing right next to me. "Good evening, family," I said. My voice was low, smooth, and projected effortlessly across the large table. It did not shake. It did not crack. It was the calm, steady voice of a man who held every single winning card in the entire deck. "I truly hope the champagne is to your liking tonight. I hear the vintage here at the Apex is highly exclusive." "What in the world are you doing here?" my father demanded, his deep voice immediately dropping into that familiar, commanding bark he had used to terrorize and control me since I was a little boy. He aggressively tried to stand up, attempting to physically tower over me to quickly establish dominance in the room. "You are supposed to be back at the estate in New York. Who is watching?" His angry words died instantly and permanently in his throat as his eyes finally registered Lyra standing there, perfectly healthy. "Hello, Grandpa," Lyra said. Her young voice was crystal clear, perfectly enunciated, and dripping with absolute, lethal venom. I did not need a pathetic babysitter tonight. I decided I wanted to fly to Hawaii and see the ocean for myself. The physical reaction was instantaneous and entirely chaotic. Vera let out a high-pitched, strangled gasp, pressing both her trembling hands tightly over her mouth as if she had just seen a dead body rise from a wooden coffin. Silas pushed his heavy wooden chair back violently, the legs scraping harshly and loudly against the marble floor. "Lyra?" Silas stammered, his eyes darting frantically and wildly between her legs, which were standing firmly and strongly on the ground, and her face. You are standing. You are talking. This is completely impossible. You are supposed to be entirely bedridden. The medical specialists said. The medical specialists Jasper Cole paid off? I interrupted smoothly, leaning forward and resting both my hands flat on their table, invading their space. I looked directly into Silas's panic-stricken, pathetic eyes. The corrupt doctors who signed completely fraudulent medical assessments so you could illegally lock her away in a state psychiatric facility in Nevada and drain her $4 million trust fund? Those specific doctors, Silas. Silence fell over table 7 like a heavy, suffocating wet blanket. Even the wealthy patrons at the nearby tables seemed to quiet down entirely, sensing the massive, aggressive, dangerous shift in the room's atmosphere. I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about, Harrison, my father said, his voice lowering into a dangerous, threatening growl. He was desperately trying to regain control, trying to put the obedient dog back in its cage before a public scandal erupted. You are making a massive scene in a highly public place. You are embarrassing this family name. Sit down right now, shut your mouth, and we will discuss this insane, paranoid delusion in private. There is absolutely no more private, Dad, I said, my voice rising just enough to cleanly cut through his fake authority. And there is absolutely no more family. Not for you. Not anymore. Fiona frantically tried to stand up, her face quickly shifting into a mask of desperate, calculated innocence. She reached her hand out toward me across the table, fake tears instantly welling up in her eyes. It was the exact same manipulative performance she used to get out of arguments back home. Harrison, honey, please listen to me. You are clearly having some sort of mental breakdown. We can explain everything. I came here on a last-minute red-eye flight because Silas called me in a panic. He was deeply worried about your parents' health. I was just trying to protect you. I looked at my wife, the woman I had vowed to deeply love and protect. I looked at the highly expensive red designer dress she bought with my hard-earned money, wearing it to a tropical island to actively seduce my own brother. Save the cheap theatrical performance, Fiona, I said coldly, my voice entirely devoid of any human emotion. You are not protecting anyone. You are a parasite. I turned slightly to my left and snapped my fingers sharply. Beatrice immediately stepped forward, placing her sleek titanium briefcase directly on top of their spilled champagne and expensive appetizers. She clicked the heavy metal locks open with a sharp, terrifying sound that echoed like a gunshot. She pulled out the incredibly thick manila folder and slammed it down right in front of Fiona's plate. What is this? Fiona whispered, her hands shaking violently as she stared at the bold, intimidating legal lettering on the cover. Those are extremely aggressive, highly punitive divorce papers, Beatrice said, her voice sharp, cold, and entirely professional. They detail extensive, undeniable video and audio proof of your year-long illicit affair with your brother-in-law, Silas. They also include the emergency court-ordered restraining order entirely freezing every single joint and personal bank account in your name. As of exactly 14 minutes ago, you are entirely legally locked out of Harrison's life, his house, and his finances. You literally have absolutely nothing. Fiona let out a choked, ugly sob, falling heavily back into her chair as if she had been physically struck in the chest with a baseball bat. Silas's face turned a bright, furious shade of red. His massive arrogance, fueled by sheer panic, finally exploded. You listen to me, you pathetic little loser, Silas spat, slamming his fist violently onto the table. You do not come here and talk to us like this. You have absolutely nothing. You are a complete nobody. You work a dead-end administrative job, you live in a cheap suburban house, and you are entirely dependent on this family's good graces. If you think you can forge some fake legal documents to scare us into backing down. Forged, Lyra interrupted loudly, reaching into the pocket of her dress. She pulled out a small silver flash drive and tossed it onto the table. It landed with a loud clatter right next to my mother's plate. There are 7 solid months of crystal-clear audio recordings on that drive, Silas. including the incredibly detailed, highly illegal conversation you all had in Cabana 4 just a few hours ago with Jasper Cole. I recorded every single word about the trust fund, the fake medical reports, and the plan to commit massive federal wire fraud to desperately save your failing commercial real estate investments. My mother, Martha, finally found her voice. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated, toxic hatred, completely dropping the polite facade of the elegant society matriarch. "You ungrateful, disgusting wretch," she hissed, her face contorting into an incredibly ugly sneer. "We gave you absolutely everything. We put a solid roof over your head. We let you carry our prestigious name. And this is exactly how you repay us? By illegally spying on your own blood? By trying to completely ruin your brother because you are intensely, pathetically jealous of his massive success." Success? I laughed, and the sound was completely hollow, entirely devoid of any humor. It was a cold, dead sound. I looked at my mother, feeling the absolute last remaining thread of my childhood attachment snap and permanently disintegrate. "Silas does not have success, Mom. Silas is a complete, utter, pathetic fraud. Just like you." I reached directly into Beatrice's open titanium briefcase and pulled out the thick physical copies of the financial ledger Lyra had printed from Silas's secure server. I threw the massive stack of papers high into the air. Hundreds of sheets of paper rained down aggressively on their table, fluttering onto their laps, completely ruining their expensive food, and blanketing the floor around them. "You are completely bankrupt, Dad," I said, leaning in so incredibly close I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath. "Your entire legendary real estate empire is built entirely on highly toxic debt and illegally leveraged retirement 401k accounts. Silas didn't build a legacy. He burned it entirely to the ground. You leveraged the entire New York estate. You are millions and millions of dollars in the red. And the FBI Financial Crimes Division is currently processing the wire fraud evidence regarding the offshore accounts in the Caymans that Silas used to hide the holding company money. Your legacy is officially over." The absolute horror that washed over my father's face was the most intensely satisfying thing I had ever witnessed in my entire 29 years of existence. The blood completely drained from his cheeks. His jaw went entirely slack. The powerful, terrifying man who had ruthlessly controlled my entire life suddenly looked incredibly old, incredibly weak, and completely, utterly terrified. The crushing reality of their total, unavoidable destruction was settling heavily over Table 7, but Silas, ever the arrogant, completely delusional golden child, absolutely refused to accept defeat. His massive, fragile ego simply could not process the undeniable fact that the quiet brother he had mocked and abused his entire life had just brutally checkmated him in front of hundreds of wealthy people. He jumped up aggressively from his chair, violently knocking it backward onto the marble floor with a loud crash. His face was purple with pure, unadulterated rage, the thick veins bulging dangerously in his neck. "I have had absolutely enough of this garbage," Silas screamed at the top of his lungs, completely ignoring the shocked gasps and murmurs from the wealthy patrons at the surrounding tables. He pointed a trembling, furious finger directly at my face. "You are completely insane, Harrison. You and this lying, manipulative little brat. I am not going to sit here in a 5-star restaurant and be threatened by a pathetic, broke loser who cannot even keep his own wife happy in his own bed." He turned frantically toward the front host stand, waving his arms aggressively in the air like a madman. "Manager! Where is the general manager of this establishment? Get over here right now." Clara, who had been standing discreetly near the grand entrance closely monitoring the entire situation, immediately stepped forward. She smoothly adjusted her sharp charcoal suit and walked purposefully and calmly toward our table, her expression completely neutral and highly professional. "Yes, sir? How may I assist you this evening?" Clara asked calmly, entirely unbothered by his screaming. Silas pointed aggressively at me, his loud voice echoing harshly across the elegant dining room. "I demand that you remove these trespassers immediately." This man and this girl are aggressively harassing my family. We are elite VIP guests paying top dollar for the presidential villa, and this man is a complete, broke nobody. I want him thrown out of this restaurant immediately. I want him thrown off this private property, and I want you to call the local island police to arrest him for criminal harassment." My parents nodded in furious, desperate agreement. My father aggressively adjusted his expensive silk tie, desperately trying to reclaim a tiny shred of his shattered dignity. "Do it immediately," Reginald barked at Clara, using his boardroom voice, "or I will personally ensure you are fired tomorrow morning, and this resort faces a massive, multi-million-dollar lawsuit for failing to protect your high-paying VIP guests." Clara stood perfectly still. She looked at Silas. She looked at my furious, red-faced father. And then, slowly and deliberately, she turned her entire body to face me. She bowed her head in a deep, highly respectful, undeniably subservient gesture. "Is there a problem with these guests, Mr. Chairman?" Clara asked, her clear voice carrying loudly across the suddenly dead-silent restaurant. "Shall I have the perimeter security team forcefully remove them from your property?" The silence that followed that single sentence was absolute, heavy, and entirely deafening. Silas's arm, which was still aggressively pointing at the front door, slowly dropped to his side as if the bones had suddenly dissolved into jelly. His mouth opened wide, but absolutely no sound came out. My mother's eyes widened to the point of bulging, her terrified gaze darting frantically between Clara's respectful posture and my completely calm, unbothered, smiling face. Fiona let out a tiny, high-pitched whimper, pressing her hands tightly against her temples as if the room was violently spinning out of control. Mr. Chairman?" My father repeated, the words stumbling out of his dry mouth like broken pieces of glass. He stared at Clara in sheer horror, then slowly dragged his terrified eyes up to finally meet mine. "What is she talking about? Harrison, what is this nonsense? Tell her to stop making jokes." Before I could even answer, Roland stepped completely out from the dark shadows directly behind Beatrice. He walked forward confidently, stepping entirely into the bright light of the crystal chandelier. The exact moment my father saw Roland's face, his knees visibly buckled. Reginald knew exactly who Roland was. Everyone in the high-stakes, cutthroat commercial real estate world knew Roland. He was an absolute titan, a billionaire who could easily crush my father's pathetic, leveraged firm with a single casual phone call. "Reginald," Roland said, his deep, intimidating voice rolling heavily over the table like a clap of thunder. "It is truly pathetic to see how incredibly far you have fallen. I always knew your business practices were slightly unethical, but plotting to illegally institutionalize your own granddaughter just to steal her trust fund? That is a highly special breed of absolute scum." "Roland?" my father stammered, his hands visibly shaking as he grabbed the hard edge of the table just to keep from collapsing onto the floor. You own this luxury resort. You are the head of Obsidian Holdings. What in God's name are you doing here with my son?" Roland let out a short, cold, highly dismissive laugh. "I do not own this resort, Reginald. Obsidian Holdings is merely a shell corporation. I am just the public-facing manager." Roland turned slightly and gestured respectfully toward me with an open hand. "Harrison is the absolute majority shareholder. He owns 75% of this entire island. He bought it 3 years ago in cold, hard cash. You are currently sitting in his restaurant, sleeping in his expensive beds, and drinking his vintage wine." The massive psychological impact of that revelation hit my family like a speeding freight train. The sheer, overwhelming impossibility of it completely broke their minds. The son they had relentlessly mocked, the quiet brother they had constantly belittled, the husband she had cruelly and repeatedly betrayed, was not a broke, pathetic loser. He was a multimillionaire corporate titan who literally owned the very ground they were standing on. "No," Silas whispered, shaking his head violently back and forth, taking a step backward until his back hit the cold glass wall of the restaurant. "No, that is completely impossible. He doesn't have that kind of money. His college fund was entirely gone. He works a miserable desk job. This is a massive lie. This is an elaborate trick. It is absolutely real, Silas, I said, my voice completely devoid of any pity or mercy. I looked at the pathetic, sweating, terrified man in the custom suit. While you were violently burning through Dad's money trying to look rich, I actually became rich. I invested early. I built a massive portfolio. I built an entire empire quietly in the shadows while you were too busy staring at yourself in the mirror and sleeping with my wife. I turned my heavy gaze entirely to my father, whose face was now a terrifying shade of ashen gray. And you, Dad, you completely wrote me off because I didn't want to be a corrupt, soulless shark like you. You stole my future to pay for Silas's idiotic mistakes. Well, Silas just made his final, fatal mistake. The FBI has all the wire fraud files. The state medical board has the undeniable evidence of the fraudulent guardianship papers. You are going to completely lose the New York estate. You are going to entirely lose the firm. You are going to spend the rest of your miserable, pathetic life dealing with federal indictments and crippling, absolute bankruptcy. I looked down at Fiona. She was openly and loudly weeping now, thick black mascara running in heavy streaks down her pale cheeks, completely ruining her expensive makeup. Harrison, please, Fiona sobbed hysterically, reaching out and desperately grabbing the expensive sleeve of my suit jacket. Her fingers dug in, begging for mercy. I was incredibly stupid. I was completely manipulated. Silas manipulated me. He told me you didn't love me anymore. He told me you were going to leave me. Please, you are my husband. I love you. We can fix this. Please don't take everything from me. I have absolutely nowhere to go. I looked down at her hand gripping my sleeve. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just complete, utter, overwhelming disgust. I aggressively and violently ripped my arm away from her grasp. Do not ever touch me again, I said, my voice dripping with pure ice. You made your choice, Fiona. You actively chose the golden child. Now you get to burn with him. Beatrice will see you in federal court. Do not ever try to contact me. I turned back to Clara, who was waiting patiently for my final command. Clara, I said loudly, ensuring the entire dining room could clearly hear me. These individuals are completely and entirely banned from this property. Cancel their reservations immediately. Seize their luggage until their outstanding room charges are settled in full. And have the security team escort them entirely off the island right now. Clara nodded sharply. She raised a small radio to her mouth. Security Team Alpha, move in. Execute immediate eviction of Table 7. From the dark shadows, 10 massive, highly trained private security guards in sharp black suits stepped out into the light. They moved with terrifying, silent efficiency. They surrounded the table entirely, cutting off any possible route of escape. Sir, ma'am, the lead guard said, his voice a deep, unquestionable rumble as he looked directly at my parents. You need to stand up and walk toward the exit right now. If you resist in any way, we will use physical force. My mother burst into loud, hysterical tears, burying her face deeply in her hands. Vera was actively hyperventilating, entirely paralyzed by sheer fear. My father tried to puff out his chest, desperately trying to maintain one final ounce of pride, but when a massive guard placed a heavy, demanding hand on his shoulder, the old man completely crumbled. He lowered his head, entirely defeated, and began to walk. Silas, however, completely lost his mind. As two guards grabbed his arms, he began thrashing violently, screaming horrific obscenities at the top of his lungs. You cannot do this to me. I am Silas. I am the heir to the family. Harrison, you little rat. I will kill you. I will absolutely destroy you. His pathetic, desperate screams echoed through the luxurious restaurant as the heavy guards effortlessly dragged him across the marble floor, his expensive Italian leather shoes scraping humiliatingly against the ground. The wealthy patrons watched in absolute, stunned silence as my entire toxic family was hauled out of the dining room like common, violent criminals. I stood there, watching them disappear through the heavy wooden doors. The massive storm had finally broken. The air in the room felt incredibly light, entirely clean, as if a toxic gas had just been vented out into the atmosphere. Lyra reached out and slipped her hand firmly into mine. We had won. The invisible brother and the silent girl had completely broken their chains. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The immediate aftermath of the explosive restaurant confrontation was a masterclass in total, absolute devastation. I did not return to the luxury penthouse to drink champagne and celebrate. I went straight down to the fortified private security office in the basement to watch the live exterior camera feeds. I needed to witness every single agonizing second of their humiliating descent into brutal reality. The large security guards forcefully dragged Silas, Fiona, my parents, and Vera out to the front circular driveway of the resort. Because Clara had completely canceled their reservations and legally seized all their assets inside the room, they were entirely locked out of their presidential villa. They had absolutely no luggage. They had no change of clothes. They were standing outside under the bright, unforgiving exterior security lights in their highly expensive evening wear, surrounded by the humid, sticky tropical night, looking exactly like completely lost, terrified children who had just been abandoned. Fiona immediately pulled out her expensive cell phone, frantically trying to call a private premium car service to take her to the airport. I watched closely on the high-definition monitor as her frantic, fast typing turned into sheer, unadulterated panic. The emergency asset freeze Beatrice had expertly filed had hit the global banking servers exactly at 8:15 p.m. Every single platinum credit card Fiona owned was instantly declined. Her joint and personal bank accounts were completely locked. She was standing in a $5,000 designer dress without a single usable penny to her name. Realizing she was completely trapped, she collapsed onto the hard stone curb, burying her head deeply between her knees, sobbing uncontrollably into the night air. Silas was furiously pacing back and forth like a caged, rabid animal. He was aggressively screaming at my father, blaming Reginald for the faulty legal advice, violently blaming Vera for being careless with the trust documents, completely refusing to take a single ounce of accountability for his own massive, catastrophic failures. My father, the once terrifying, untouchable patriarch of the family, simply sat down heavily on a concrete planter, his head resting in his hands, looking completely broken and entirely hollow. The mighty commercial real estate titan had been entirely reduced to a helpless, broke old man stranded in a parking lot. Because they had absolutely no money to pay for a private shuttle or a cheap hotel room, and they adamantly refused to walk off the property, the local island police eventually arrived. The resort security formally and aggressively charged them with criminal trespassing. I watched with absolute, cold satisfaction as my incredibly arrogant brother, Silas, completely lost his temper with a police officer and was forcefully tackled, handcuffed, and shoved roughly into the back of a dirty police cruiser for causing a violent public disturbance. The very next morning, the legal bloodbath officially began, and it was glorious. Beatrice was an absolute, terrifying artist in the courtroom, and she painted a masterpiece of total destruction. She immediately filed the undeniable evidence of the guardianship fraud directly with the state medical board and the federal authorities. The highly corrupt doctor who had signed Lyra's fake medical assessments was immediately stripped of his medical license, publicly humiliated, and placed under a severe federal investigation for medical fraud. Jasper Cole, the slimy lawyer who thought he was untouchable, was formally disbarred within a month for gross ethical violations and conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud. But the most satisfying, brutal downfall belonged entirely to Fiona and Silas. The divorce proceedings were incredibly swift and entirely merciless. Because we had explicit, undeniable high-definition video proof of her extensive infidelity, combined with the hard financial evidence that she had actively participated in a conspiracy to defraud my family's assets. The judge showed her absolutely zero mercy. The ironclad prenuptial agreement she had haughtily laughed at years ago was enforced to the absolute maximum legal limit. I took the suburban house. I took the luxury cars. I took every single piece of expensive furniture she loved. Fiona walked out of the courtroom with nothing but a single suitcase of clothes and a massive mountain of legal debt she could never hope to repay in her lifetime. The absolute last time I saw her, she was standing outside the downtown courthouse in the freezing, pouring rain, desperately trying to hail a cheap yellow cab, looking utterly defeated. She tried to make eye contact with me, mouthing the word, "sorry." But I simply rolled up the heavily tinted window of my car and drove away without giving her a second glance. Silas's fate was far, far worse. The FBI Financial Crimes Division aggressively descended on my father's real estate firm like a swarm of highly angry locusts. They kicked in the doors and seized every single computer hard drive, every physical ledger, and froze every corporate bank account. They uncovered a massive, sprawling web of highly illegal wire transfers, incredibly leveraged toxic debt, and blatant, arrogant tax evasion. Because Silas had been actively using the family holding company to illegally fund his luxurious lifestyle and his expensive affair with Fiona, he bore the absolute brunt of the federal indictments. He lost the gleaming silver Porsche to federal asset forfeiture. He lost his highly expensive downtown penthouse. His heavily leveraged commercial properties were aggressively and publicly foreclosed upon by the furious, panicked banks. To avoid spending 20 hard years in a federal penitentiary, Silas was violently forced to take a devastating, humiliating plea deal. He narrowly avoided maximum prison time, but he was completely banned for life from acting as a director of any company, heavily fined millions of dollars he absolutely did not have, and sentenced to 5 long years of strict probation and grueling manual community service. The untouchable golden child was officially a convicted felon, spending his weekends picking up trash on the side of the busy highway in a bright orange vest. As for my parents, the absolute shock of the public scandal completely and permanently shattered their fragile, vanity-driven world. The high society friends they had spent decades desperately trying to impress abandoned them overnight, treating them like lepers. They were entirely blacklisted from every exclusive country club and prestigious HOA meeting in the entire state. The massive suburban New York estate was aggressively seized by the bank to cover the crushing mountain of toxic debt Silas had accumulated. They were forcefully evicted and forced to pack whatever they could carry in garbage bags, moving into a tiny, run-down 2-bedroom apartment on the incredibly bad side of town. Vera, absolutely terrified of the massive legal repercussions regarding her active role in attempting to steal Lyra's trust fund, completely abandoned ship. She rapidly signed over full legal guardianship of Lyra directly to me without a single fight, packed her designer bags, and fled the state, desperately trying to avoid the incoming federal fraud charges. Within a matter of incredibly short weeks, the towering, terrifying, abusive empire of my family had been completely and entirely reduced to ashes. The oppressive, suffocating shadow they had cast over my entire life was entirely gone. The monsters were finally dead. 6 months later, the chaotic, heavy dust had finally settled, and a beautiful, bright new dawn broke over my life. I officially and legally adopted Lyra. We moved completely out of the miserable, toxic city and relocated to a stunning, peaceful, sprawling estate I purchased in the quiet, rolling green hills of upstate New York. Lyra was quickly enrolled in a highly prestigious private academy, where she instantly proved herself to be a brilliant, thriving, highly popular student. Without the suffocating, highly toxic weight of Vera and my parents constantly pressing down on her, she blossomed rapidly into an incredibly happy, fiercely intelligent teenager. Her massive $4 million trust fund was legally locked into an ironclad, heavily protected account personally managed by Roland, entirely safe from any greedy hands until she turned 18. As for me, I finally stepped entirely and permanently out of the dark shadows. I officially took over as the highly public chairman of Obsidian Holdings. I stopped completely hiding my extreme wealth and my massive corporate success. I realized I didn't need to make myself small, quiet, or invisible to make incredibly toxic people comfortable anymore. It was a crisp, highly beautiful Tuesday morning in early April. I was driving my brand new car, a stunning, massive midnight black Rolls-Royce Phantom, down the quiet, tree-lined street toward my massive corporate office building in the center of the city. The rich leather interior smelled like absolute, undeniable success. The massive engine purred with quiet, incredible, intimidating power. As I pulled up smoothly to the heavily guarded security gates of my corporate building, I saw two incredibly familiar, highly pathetic figures standing shivering on the public sidewalk near the entrance. It was my parents. They looked incredibly old, completely haggard, and entirely broken by life. My father was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit that looked like it had been bought at a discount thrift store. My mother was completely devoid of her expensive jewelry, her hair graying rapidly and completely unkempt. They looked exactly like the desperate strangers they were. I pulled the massive Rolls-Royce slowly over to the curb and smoothly rolled down the heavily tinted window. When they saw my face, their tired, sunken eyes lit up with a desperate, highly pathetic glimmer of false hope. They rushed eagerly over to the side of the car, gripping the edge of the window frame with trembling, cold hands. "Harrison," my father said, his voice entirely weak and raspy, devoid of any of its former power. He looked at the highly luxurious interior of the Rolls-Royce with naked, greedy desperation. "Thank God we finally found you. We have been desperately trying to contact your lawyers for months." "What do you want, Reginald?" I asked, my voice entirely flat, completely devoid of any anger or sadness. I did not call him Dad. I never would again. My mother began to violently cry, real, ugly tears of pure desperation spilling down her wrinkled cheeks. "Harrison, please. We have absolutely nothing left. Silas is completely bankrupt and aggressively refuses to speak to us. The bank entirely took our house. We are living in a horrible, freezing apartment. We can barely afford basic groceries at the store. Please, you are our son. You have so incredibly much money now. Can't you just give us a small, monthly allowance? Just enough to help us survive." I looked deeply at them. I looked closely at the very people who had systematically, joyfully destroyed my entire childhood. I looked at the man who had cruelly stolen my college fund to pay for a sports car. I looked at the woman who had laughed mockingly at me in the driveway while she went on a luxury vacation with the money they were actively trying to steal from a disabled 14-year-old girl. "I am absolutely not your son," I said quietly, the absolute, crushing finality of my words hanging heavily in the crisp morning air. "Your son is currently picking up garbage on the side of Route 9 in an orange vest. You clearly made your choice a long, long time ago. You bet your entire legacy on the golden child. It is absolutely not my problem that your horse completely lost the race. Harrison, please. We are your family," my father begged loudly, his massive pride entirely shattered, openly weeping on the public sidewalk for anyone to see. "Family?" I said, my voice completely cold and entirely unyielding. "Does not treat you like a pathetic doormat. Family does not actively steal your future. Family does not sleep with your wife and laugh about it over expensive champagne in a cabana. You are entirely strangers to me. If you ever come near my office, my home, or my daughter Lyra ever again, I will have my private security team aggressively arrest you for criminal trespassing and harassment. This is the absolute last time you will ever see my face." I smoothly rolled up the heavily tinted window, completely and permanently cutting off their desperate, pathetic screams. I put the Rolls-Royce into drive and glided effortlessly through the heavy steel security gates, leaving them standing entirely alone on the cold, unforgiving sidewalk, completely trapped in the miserable, inescapable hell they had built with their own two hands. I parked the massive car, walked confidently into the main lobby of my building, and took the private VIP elevator all the way up to the executive penthouse suite. When the polished doors opened, Lyra was sitting comfortably on one of the expensive leather couches, working diligently on a school project, laughing brightly and genuinely at something on her computer screen. Beatrice was sitting professionally at the large conference table, reviewing highly profitable quarterly corporate acquisition reports. I looked at them, and for the very first time in my entire 29 years of life, my chest felt completely and entirely full. I realized, in that quiet, beautiful, perfect moment, that true family is absolutely not determined by blood. Blood just simply means you are biologically related. True family is determined by intense loyalty, by fierce respect, and by the people who firmly and proudly stand by your side when the entire world aggressively tries to tear you down. I had spent my entire life hopelessly trying to earn a tiny seat at a table that was explicitly designed to starve me. So I completely burned their toxic table to the ground and I built my own. If you are listening to this right now, and you feel like the invisible, forgotten black sheep of your toxic family, I need you to remember one highly important thing. Sheep are easily herded, easily manipulated, and easily slaughtered by predators. But wolves? Wolves aggressively and proudly forge their own paths. Do not ever let incredibly toxic, abusive people convince you that you are hard to love just because they severely lack the basic human capacity to love you correctly. Set your absolute, unbreakable boundaries. Fiercely protect your inner peace. And never, ever apologize for finally standing up and walking away permanently from the people who constantly hurt you. Have you ever faced something incredibly similar with your own toxic family? Have you ever had to permanently cut off the people who were supposed to protect you? Share your survival story in the comments below, and do not forget to rigidly hit that like button and aggressively subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next incredible journey. Stay incredibly strong, stay fiercely unapologetic, and I will see you in the next video.